our talk is what we're talking about here. And thank you everyone for joining us. And I'm delighted to be able to do this with Kurt. So I'm going to speak in the first half of it, and then Kurt will
Yeah,
handle more
we
of the
need to.
technical side of the mapping, which he's expert in. So we're talking about managing beavers on a watershed level and combining riparian habitat connectivity and estimating potential beaver populations and beaver recovery zones, and a tool also for data collection across those. Superior Bioconservancy it's a nonprofit 501(c)(3), and our mission is to restore the biological integrity and hydrology of the Great Lakes region and the Laurentian Forest Province, specifically throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So we're really a habitat and biodiversity interested in genetic exchange, ecosystem services, and really we think of ourselves as a healthcare plan for this
Oh,
bioregion of the Earth. Anyone would everyone also just make sure that you're muted because we're occasionally getting a little feedback somehow. So this is the region of the planet. We live on an organism, and this is a reflection of what it looks like from space. And this changes your perspective because the life zone is really a very thin membrane over the whole planet of about 25 miles. So the focus area, this is primarily a forest. This is this lobe of the boreal forest. It swings down across in the upper Great Lakes. And we're looking at the yellow is the watershed of Lake Superior, which is the most important freshwater body in this hemisphere. There's more fresh water there than the other lakes combined. And so that's why this landform is sort of a wellhead protection for this region. If you haven't seen Lake Superior, it's a beautiful, large, vast inland sea. It also has an overlay of Ojibwe territories, and these have usufructuary rights, which are hunt and gather, which is in effect on the 21 million acres of public land that's across that landscape. We're also here, this just shows the headwaters of how this places in the United States. So you've got the headwaters of the Mississippi River, plus also the headwaters of the whole Lake Superior or the whole Great Lakes region. So 3% of the planet of all the water on Earth is fresh waters. The rest is salt. And so that's why this is significantly important. And this particular region is still primarily forest, so it hasn't been converted to agriculture. So the biodiversity genetics are still there in the soil, a lot of mycelium and the integrity of that. We also have had the largest recolonization of wolves across the landscape with about 4,400 wolves in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, northern Wisconsin, and Minnesota. But the hydrology is what we're focusing on here in this conversation. And this is a water-rich area. We have about 35 inches of rain, and this is the replenishment for the Mississippi as well as that. So when beavers were extirpated from here starting in the 1600s, it changed that hydrology significantly. So prior to that, we had all the streams, and this is by Ishpeming, Michigan. This was done in 1868 by Henry Morgan in his book about the American beaver. And you had really, the ponds were a series on first order and second order streams, sort of like pearls on a chain. And each of these, so the volume of water here was significantly more. This is actually what that looks like. You can see with my cursor, if you can see it here, these are the dams, and then there's a series of canals that go around it. So this is the exact same system that has been persistent now for 170 years. So this is me flying over it a couple of years ago. But these wetlands also hold a huge volume of water, and they're causing a lot of recharge into the system. So when you have these sort of stair steps there, you've got as much as 8 times as much volume being held. You have groundwater infiltration, you have purification, you have stream complexity, and that adds a lot of productivity to it. So beaver ponds function a little bit like sewage treatment plants in that they're driving this water back in as it goes to the substrate, the hyporheic zone, that wet zone underneath. The bacteria in there can break down nitrates and other pollutants, but you also have this speed bump effect of slowing down water and retaining water. This is Pikes Creek, which is up in Bayfield County in northern Wisconsin. And you can see the difference. This picture was taken about 10 minutes apart. The stream is running pretty much without beaver structures in it. It's roiled up. It's carrying a lot more sediment. Here you have that slowing down. You have water here. Um,
One.
in the hyporheic zone here is this a zone that most people don't pay much attention. This is sort of think of this as you've got the tip of the iceberg here and then the iceberg underneath. So this is where you're getting groundwater exchange, and this is where a lot of filtration can happen, and also you're getting resurfacing of groundwater, which cools the water and adds complexity. So you get warmer water in the winter and cooler water in the summer. So it adds a lot of complexity to it. And so what it looks like from a three-dimensional standpoint, when you have your normal stream going down, it's speeding along. When you add this hydrostatic pressure puts that down, you get this additional water storage. And Emily Fairfax showed this in a diagram here, but you're basically getting a greener belt across here too. So this is groundwater that the trees and grasses have access to. So you raise that water table and you're refilling that aquifer, and you're getting the surplus being maintained and held there. When beavers come into an area, they're going to add this complexity. And with that, you've got a number of dams that be forced there. So they'll start out with one, but then you start get this system, which you might get up to 15, 20, and they completely change really what the topography looks like that and wet it. Voyageurs National Park is a fairly newer park. So it's about 50 years old now. It's 1975. And so we have one of the higher densities of beavers here because that's when trapping started here. And this area in here is 340 square miles inside this line here. But what you see there is also how much more water is stored in that. So in the Greater Voyager system, you have a total area of 525 square miles of this larger system down here. But the surface area of beaver ponds has added 27 square miles of surface water. So that's a huge multiplier. And that's how we have to think of beavers as an element of hydrology, not so much as a component of just fur. And so the laws of the country, the Clean Water Act is the point of the Clean Water Act is stated in the federal law is to restore and maintain the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the nation's waters. And what beavers do is they do all these things because of that effect upon the hydrology, especially biological integrity, because that's the system that cleans water naturally. So they define that as an environment that supports an assemblage of organisms similar to that produced by long-term evolutionary processes, has high biological integrity. So what beavers do is they restore that hydrology within streams, and that's really one of the main benefits that they have, that we as humans benefit from. So this is long-term, this is where nature will want to revert to this. So that is what we also know that beavers basically are the keys to biodiversity. And so these watersheds that they have, when these ponds, they're sort of like the fruit, if you think of a tree, because watersheds look like trees in winter with all the branches out, and you get the birds, you get amphibians, plant communities, and this richness of varieties of different types of animals are riches. So in our climate, really, these end up being the coral reefs of biodiversity or the rainforests of our region. So the Endangered Species Act identified a lot of species that we are losing. So we're actually in a global crisis around biodiversity, and healthy wetlands are vital protecting. So about 60% of the species are wetland dependent. So restoring those wetlands is one of the easiest, and letting the beaver do the work for us and bear the cost of the effort is in our best interest. So the climate really is a product of biodiversity, and biodiversity is a stabilizer climate. So the natural system we've changed. So in the last 300 years of the Industrial Revolution, starting around 1700, we've had this radical change of the planet between pavings and street and emissions of fossil fuels. So the natal hydrology that beavers give us many benefits. And those benefits really are the stream structure is stronger. We get water quality, we get stable quantities, we get biodiversity, flood reduction, and climate resilience. I worked on a study in Milwaukee where we showed if we had beavers reestablished in the wetlands upstream, that we would get some significant lowered peak flood levels because of this hydrological effect. And here you can see some of the chart on the lower left here. These are some suburbs that are a little bit north of Milwaukee, Whitefish Bay, but we also just looked at just in these few, Glendale, Whitefish Bay, we took over 500 houses technically out of the floodplain by lowering these peak flood levels on average about 37%. Flooding is one of the things that we're going to be seeing more as we have instability in the climate. And when you do this to a town, it's wrecked, and it's bankrupts systems to try to put a new infrastructure, the water pipes, electrical pipes, and all the property damage that has resulted from that. we can think of the lifespan that beavers give us with terms of infrastructure. So this is that Milwaukee same watershed. It's 900 square miles, but this is showing the bridges and the culverts in there. So the lifespan, society's cost for replacement of this if we have a flood. So beavers are really one of our best forms of green infrastructure. Emily Fairfax has done a lot of great work regarding fire. And this is a refugia from a hot fire that happened in Idaho. And if it's green and it's wet, it doesn't burn. And it stays green when it's wet. The public trust doctrine gives us, as the public, the rights to uphold and hold the agencies accountable to what they're to do. So wildlife is not owned by, it's part of the public trust. So the agencies are really the trustees of wildlife, and the agency does not own the wildlife. Rather, wildlife is owned by the public, and government agencies are entrusted in the care of these natural assets, and they are to be safeguarded for the public's long-term benefit. That's the statement of that within our Constitution. There's also this North American wildlife model has a series of core principles, which is a cornerstone of biodiversity. So this establishes a kind of a guiding principle that ensure an ethical and sustainable management of wildlife resources for the benefit of current and future generations. So a couple core principles. So that's the public trust that I mentioned here. Elimination of markets for game that prohibits the commercial trade in wildlife, preventing unsustainable harvesting and for profit. So that's why rhino horns and ducks and ivory and things have been outlawed. So there's an allocation of wildlife by law that access to wildlife is determined through laws and regulations, but there has to be some sort of regulation. So part of that is you have to know that the value, or you have to know what your asset is. So think of yourself, you have a bank account, and that natural capital, if it's 100, you have to know what's there. And if it's not there, then that public trust has to be responsible for the legitimate use of wildlife. So, and part of one of these things is an ethical part, is that wildlife can only be used for sustenance, sport, research, or other legitimate purposes. There needs to be international cooperation and cooperation between countries because a lot of these are migratory. But scientific management and management decisions are to be founded on scientific research and data. So that's one of the principles here that we're providing here, is a method to scientifically know what's on the landscape so that it can be managed and protected to ensure that all citizens' rights are being protected. So in many places, beavers are not protected. This is the current zones in Wisconsin. There's no rhyme or reason. It's a northern part here in the sea, so there's no record keeping. It's a season, so any methods can be known. You can shoot them, trap them, and there's no known population here, and there's no record keeping. When they did take record keeping, this is how it looked. It was a downward curve, a crash. So going from like 225,000 down to about 75,000, or no, it was about 50,000 here. And they counted them using aerial surveys using these block systems that was in northern Wisconsin. So not many places actually know what they have in terms of what is the capital, the natural capital. And Wisconsin also has a policy of killing beavers. It's the only state that's spending a significant amount of funds to kill beavers with the dogma that they believe they're helping trout. But a lot of places, beavers are really not protected because they're not recognized by these agencies for the public benefits that they have. So this is the process, and this is the system we're going to show you is a way to hold them accountable. So with trapping fur bear management does not follow basically the North American model of wildlife conservation. And the United States Department of Agriculture has a damage control rather than using non-lethal management. And there's unregulated markets, and that there's no accountability to the public trust. So because most state agencies do not recognize that beavers are ecosystem engineers or a keystone species, I was motivated to develop the system that Kurt will show you that will, in essence, give us an inventory and a way of keep a record keeping. So they are the architects of healthy watershed hydrology. And so we need a radical change in beaver management, really in North America, and a new watershed model of wildlife management that upholds the public trust doctrine. So, for example, Wisconsin's in a new management plan year for a 10-year cycle, so it'll go from 2026 to 36. So this new science of beaver management takes individual watershed subbasins and thinks of them like a cell of an organism. And to stabilize the land and rebuild the biodiversity, we need to manage each basin individually. And each sub-basin should be managed to promote the goals of Clean Water Act and go for biological integrity. And so one of the things when you have that done, you could also have trapping regulations that would be guided by science. So the person would use your phone, similar to many of the phone apps for on trails. Onyx Hunt, this is an example using theirs, where the trapper would have it say his traps are here, but then he would be taking a picture. So if this was a zone where there was a limit of, let's say, 10 beavers could be trapped there, once it read that, that would automatically be closed. And so you wouldn't be depleting that. You would also have record keeping so you would know what was taken. So this management corrects and holds the wild agencies to be accountable to their jobs as trustees of the public assets. The harvest records would be kept and maintain population sustainable harvest quotas, the who, what, where, and when the populations are. So that would be geolocated. This would assist to rebuild the hydrology and riparian structures that beavers works create for healthy rivers and streams, canals, the ponds. And the baseline data of water quality and biodiversity would be maintained over time, exactly like human health records. So just like you have a medical chart, this would be similar to that, and each watershed would have that, and it would be based in a cloud-based system. So it's a healthcare record system, and it would really be tracking biodiversity. So this would, in essence, require the agencies to fulfill their responsibility of the Clean Water Act, Endangered Species, and the Public Trust Doctrine. So from there, I'm going to switch over to Kurt, and he can tell you how it would all work. So thank you, Kurt.
All right. Thanks, Bob. So yeah, we're going to talk about showing a lot of maps in this second half. So this is the study area that we've been working in. It's large. It's 100,000 square miles, includes part of the states of Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And this region is also known as Laurentian Mixed Forest Province of the North Woods. And it's a transition zone between the northern boreal forests of Canada, which are predominantly coniferous, and the eastern deciduous forests of the US, which are predominantly hardwoods. Next, Bob. So Bob mentioned this a little bit, but habitats are increasingly being fragmented due to highways, urban development, even things like activities like farming. And one of the basic tenets of conservation biology is that maintaining connectivity is crucial for supporting biodiversity and ecosystem functions, because it enables species to move, to migrate, and disperse across landscapes. And with the amount of habitat left, maintaining connectivity is the only way we're really going to be able to have functional ecosystems at this point. So this map shows the results of our connectivity analysis, and it measures biodiversity connectivity weighted towards riparian areas. And we can use this data to identify the connections between the 21 million acres of public land across the study area. Next. So in this map, what I've done is extracted the corridors from that connectivity analysis in the previous slide, and they're the purple lines. So this better illustrates the linkages between the public lands. Next, Bob. This is another example of that analysis. So this is near Wausau, Wisconsin. And this shows how many different connections there are between different public lands. And so this model really gives us the true complexity of the natural world and provides, shows that there's numerous possibilities to protect connectivity between different public protected areas. And so that's really important when we go into implementation to protect some of these areas. And in this slide, we also see a number of critical riparian crossings, and we can see the importance of this riparian network for maintaining connectivity even in a populated region like this with big roads. So now I'm showing a related but completely separate analysis. Here we're looking at watersheds, and they're colored by the potential beaver population. So we modeled potential beaver population by watershed. The ones in the darkest green have the highest potential beaver population. Next. And the US Geological Survey produces watershed boundaries at different scales. So this is the next level of detail. So we've repeated this analysis at different scales of watershed. So again, we're looking at the highest potential beaver population in the darkest green watersheds. And next. And this is the highest resolution available. These are called HUC 12 watersheds. They're about 20 to 30,000 acres each. And so we have this potential beaver population data aggregated at different watershed scales. And we'll show you how that comes into play in a minute. Next. So this is a screenshot of a web application we produced so that we could make all this data that I'm showing you publicly available and usable by anyone. So in this website, again, we're seeing the watersheds colored by their potential beaver population. So we're just seeing that data online. You can zoom in and zoom out. And further, you can click on one of these watersheds and get aggregated statistics for it. So in this pop-up window on the right, you're seeing the actual value, the number of potential beaver, 336, the total linkage acres from that first connectivity analysis I showed. And then there's other beaver-centric data, such as percent wetlands, percent beaver suitable vegetation, etc. Next. So this is a screenshot of the companion website. We have two. This focuses on that connectivity analysis. And so here too, you can click on a watershed and get summary statistics. And so here we're also able to see the potential beaver population, but we're also seeing connectivity analysis statistics, like the number of linkage acres. Next. So with this data-driven approach, we've been able to identify what we're calling beaver recovery zones. So if we focus in on the Upper Peninsula, there's a couple big green watersheds, and they have these little purple beaver recovery zones in the middle. Those little purple beaver recovery zones are the fine HUC 12 level watersheds that have the highest potential beaver population in the larger green watershed. And our plan calls for trapping to be prohibited in these recovery zones. So they'll serve as ecosystem health anchors. So beavers can safely breed and disperse to nearby smaller watersheds where trapping has been allowed. And so this scheme would allow a sustainable beaver harvest, and it would allow beavers to thrive as keystone species and ecological engineers. Next. So this brings me to our new paradigm for managing beaver harvest. So as Bob illustrated, the size and the distribution of the beaver population is largely unknown in most US states. So this results in a wide open beaver season. And our solution is to implement a mobile app-based beaver harvest tool. So in this scheme, trappers are going to be assigned a watershed to trap in. They're going to be using this app on their mobile phone, and they're going to record their beaver harvest. And that could involve lots of different data elements. It's going to record the GPS coordinates. They can take a photo, the number of beaver harvested, etc. So this would allow the agency to develop a data-driven population estimate for each watershed and eventually establish trapping quotas. And as Bob mentioned, if there's a trapping quota, once that's been reached in a watershed, that would be closed for the rest of the season. Again, resulting in a sustainable beaver harvest. And the way we're going to make this possible is using this open source platform called Mergent Maps, which integrates very well with the open source GIS called QGIS. It's very user-friendly and intuitive. It includes cloud data storage and data versioning. It's available for Apple phones, Android phones, Windows phones. And the fact that it's open source simply eliminates licensing fees. Next. And Bob, if you can click play on this down at the bottom. Yeah, there we go. So this is a little video. This is showing the QGIS software with the data that I've been talking about. And so as Bob plays this, yeah, you're going to see me moving around, and we're going to turning off layers. And what's going to pop up next is my mobile phone. So I'm going to pretend I'm here a trapper, and I'm using the app that we're talking about. And I'm out here where I'm trapping, and I'm going to record my beaver harvest. So I'm going to enter the number of beaver that I just trapped. I'm going to take a photo. In this demo, I'm using a photo from my camera roll because was in my office. I wasn't actually trapping. And I can enter some notes. and click record, and I've registered that data. That data becomes synchronized up to the cloud automatically. It also allows the trapper to use different base maps, such as an aerial photo shown here in the app, so you can switch the base map around. And so as soon as that data is saved, it's automatically pushed up to the cloud. So now the game warden back in the office in QGIS can synchronize the data and pull that down. And in the office, they're now seeing the data that Trapper just recorded, and they can zoom in and see the harvest record, and they can actually click on it and see the data that came from that trapping result, including the photo, the number of beaver that were harvested, and any other data that was going to be collected in that effort. So that's our solution. This is looking at the attribute table of the recorded data, which again would include GPS coordinates, the name of the trapper potentially, and things like that. So next. So in conclusion, this system will provide a modern digital way to manage beaver populations. It can be implemented anywhere. It can be used for actually, we're talking about beaver here, but there's no reason this couldn't be used for any game species, deer, elk, waterfowl, other fur bearers. And it's going to provide a data-driven understanding of ecosystem health, that health score Bob talked about. So each watershed can have a score for its biodiversity, the species composition, connectivity score. Plus, it's going to have a historical record so you can see the trends over time for watersheds and assess the health. And so with this system, it's going to allow beavers to thrive as keystone species and ecological engineers. And now if we have any time, I think we can take some questions.
Yeah, we just have a couple folks in the chat asking how you estimated the beaver populations.
So that was done using a fairly straightforward formula that took into account the land use in the watershed and data from studies based on the average number of beaver colonies per suitable stream mile, and then the average number of beavers in a colony. So it's probably, the upper end of its potential, but it's an ideal number. It would be like basically the carrying capacity of the watershed. And in reality, there's probably going to be fewer beaver than that in most of them. But that's what we used, was a simple formula.
And that was used from, those are peer-reviewed studies where they took different systems that have been basically protected zones for long periods of time, 50 years, and that's where they would basically float up to. So they generally go beyond that and then they float down. So it's stream miles and wetland percentages. The wetlands actually are kind of a archaeological record of percentage of wetlands, because many of those wetlands were created by beavers in pre-settlement.
Hey,
Any other
Bob,
questions there, Karis?
Bob, you're able to mute people. Can you mute that person? I think you're able to do it in the participants column.
Where?
If you
Here? Yeah. Let's see. What can do up there?
We've only got a couple minutes left. Some folks in the chat are asking, by harvested, you mean?
Oh, I got everybody there though.
Yeah. By harvested, it would definitely mean killed. So yeah,
Right.
when they that means that the beaver have been trapped and killed. So yeah, absolutely, it's a lethal event.
Cheryl says, I think some of the agency feedback could be they don't have staff to match trappers with trapping zones, but the app is a great idea. Oh, sorry. Maybe there's a way to choose your own adventure, so to speak, but we'd have to get the word out about the app.
Yeah, that's true. And we've actually thought that, it may not just be trappers using this. This could also be used by citizen scientists, universities. Students could go out and validate the connectivity analysis and start mapping beaver locations. So there's other ways this technology can be used, even if an agency is unwilling to work with it.
Yeah, and if it's housed by a university system, for instance, they become basically the library of this medical records, if you will, for each unit. Any other types of studies there, whether somebody's studying frogs or they're studying birds, critical habitat for any wide variety of species can be mapped and zoned. And so that, in essence, having a lot of that information democratizes it, that the public could access this if there's a road going through, or there's going to be a pipeline or something that might be extractive and significant on it. What's the real environmental impact? And so it becomes the record that anyone can look at and say, well, we have landing turtle. This has got the best landing turtle habitat in it. So it's a way, as a repository, becomes a game management, but unless the agencies do something like this, it's like someone who has your bank account. They have no accounting of who's taking what out of it. And it's a public trust thing. And the trapping population is a very small percent of the population. It's less than 0.3%. But the rest of us have benefits that we would gain from having less flooding, more biodiversity, infrastructure. The real society costs of fire flood are bigger issues than a pair of fur mittens for North America. And with climate change, it's more critical to reestablish and rebuild these populations.
Thanks so much. We need to end so we can get to the next meeting, but that was great. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you, Bob and Kurt.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody who listened. If you've got any questions, send them to the chat, and we'll try to get back to you.